and how can we educate and make our viewers aware of the harms that the social media can do, and what are the learnings? What can we do to protect ourselves, our loved ones? Especially, we have seen a lot of incidents that have taken place, including a said death of an MP as well. With a lot of hate comments and online abuse we see that are very prevalent in our society, and surely as a society we must take a step as well. Now, all of this and many more, we'll be discussing those, and of course we'll also touch towards the end about the mental health and how it impacts our mental health, and does it only impact our mental health, or can it also impact physically? All of this and many more we'll be discussing in our tonight's program. But before that, let us introduce our three guests who have kindly joined with us virtually. And my first guest for tonight is Mr. Jamal Ahmed, who is a Fellow of Information Privacy. Can you hear us? Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, and thank you very much for having me tonight.
Thank you very much for giving us your valuable time. Next guest, we've got Mr. Nazimuddin, who is a political analyst and, of course, frequently our guest on Channel S as well, like our previous guest, Mr. Jamal Ahmed. Mr. Nazim, can you hear us? Assalamu alaikum.
I can hear you properly, yes.
Thank you very much for giving us your valuable time. Inshallah, we'll come back to you. And our third guest, of course, Mr. Ben Anderson, who is the founder of Feeling Social. Can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Good evening.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you very much for giving us your valuable time, and I'll be finding out more about what Feeling Social is about and what work do you do and what work does your organization does. And stay tuned with us. I'll be definitely coming back to you, but before that, let's start first with Mr. Jamal Ahmed. I'm sure you've heard the news last month, of course, the whistleblower, as we say, a lot of allegation you've seen against the tech giant Facebook, and of course a lot of other social media are also not free from such allegations. Now, your thoughts, I'd like to find out from you as an expert in an IT industry. Does social media, do you think it's time that it needs to be regulated?
There are lots of calls from experts, not just in data privacy and data protection, but throughout many different industries, including the mental health sectors, which says social media has to be regulated. And this is something that Ofcom have actually been looking quite closely at, and we can see around the world there are laws being introduced to regulate social media in terms of actually protecting children first. So there has to be a start somewhere. We need to protect the most vulnerable and the most at risk from being exploited through the use of social media. And once we start taking care of the children, then we can have a look at what else we can do to bring in regulation for adults. Now, the problem is when you look at laws, when you look at the English legal system or any legal system, you can see that they're very old, they're very archaic, and it takes a long time to bring any regulation into place. And in Europe, in 2018, we had the GDPR, which came into force, and that took a long time. And one of the things GDPR recognized was the way people use technology, the way people communicate, the way people interact is actually changing. And what we need to do now is to bring in a comprehensive set of laws to protect people when they are sharing personal information and accessing platforms like Facebook digitally. And when GDPR actually first came in, if you look into the early history, you can see Facebook actually faced a large fine for failing to protect people's data privacy. Now, the funny thing here is it took Facebook 8 minutes to make the money to pay that fine, but what they lost on the share price and what they lost in terms of people that used that service was actually a lot more impactful than any penalties they faced through the regulation. So yes, regulation is required. The challenge is when you do bring in regulators, when you have the companies with the resources of Facebook, with the lawyers that they have, they can normally tie these kind of enforcements and regulations up in courts for many, many years.
Now, when it comes to regulation, of course, we know there is, at the moment, discussion going on about the online hate bill. Now, by the time it comes into law, the technology would have gone much more faster ahead, and most of the things that might have been mentioned there could be outdated. So how do we keep up with the pace?
The best way to keep up with the pace is to bring in regulations and bring in legislation which is actually future-proof. And the way to do that is by not being too prescriptive, but by more giving guiding principles and more giving approaches. So as we do technology changes, as the way we use technology changes, the law remains fit for purpose and appropriate in every context.
Thank you very much for that. I'll come back to you, Mr. Jamal. Jamal, please do come in.
What brother Nazim has saying, and it's very interesting what he said about politics and Facebook. So if we go back to the election that we saw in the US, we could see that we had the most polarized US elections in history. And one of the main reasons for that was the way social media was being used as a tool to spread misinformation and also to polarize people's views. So one of the things you can do with social media is you can understand what people are interested in, what their personalities are. And by understanding what makes them tick, you can send them specific messages that are going to influence to vote in one way or another way. Now, when it comes to winning elections, there's two ways to win an election. Number one is you get the most people to vote for you. The other one is you stop people from going and voting for your opposition. And what a lot of political parties have been spending a lot of money on Facebook doing is saying, identifying their supporters, seeing what things they care about and sending them targeted messages on those things to make them go and vote for them. And those that they've identified are not their supporters, they spread misinformation and lies about them to dissuade them from going out and voting for their president or their representative of choice. And we know this is a far bigger scandal because even in the UK, we saw with Brexit, we also saw with the company Cambridge Analytica and all the scandal that was involved in that, and how social media is actually being used as a weapon to sway what happens in a democratic state. And that is totally unacceptable, and that needs a lot more regulation. And we can see that people are being misinformed, and this is increasing the amount of people that we see on the far left and the amount of people we see on the far right, and this is directly contributing to the society that is breaking down, and political leaders have no control over that because the leaders, the people who are owning tech organizations like Facebook, are making the decisions about who is going to get put into power and how, because they want the advertising revenue, because they want more people to spend time on that. And if you look at the claims and the allegations and the evidence that is coming out from this whistleblowing and the Facebook papers, or whatever the media decided to call them today, you can see that Facebook algorithm is actually promoting hate more, in fact, up to 8 times more than they are promoting other material because it gets them more engagement.
Now, I'll come to that with regards to the revenue that has been generated to adverts. Now, you've mentioned about Brexit there. Just to keep it fair and balanced, a lot of people who have voted Brexit would say they haven't been misinformed. They have been totally fully informed and voted not because of what says on Facebook, but because they, according to their understanding, this is what they think is the best way forward. How would you deal with that?
That's a very fair comment. I would say, where is the £300,000 a week that he was meant to save as a result of Brexit? I haven't seen it. How long have we been? How long has it been that we left Europe? What I do see is shortage in ourselves. What I do see is lack of people and lack of labour. What I do see is lack of income for landlords. What I do see is lack of business. All I'm seeing is problems. I'm yet to see one single benefit that we've had from Brexit, other than some people saying, well, now we make our own decisions.
Fair enough. The program, the direction will go towards completely a different angle, but just to balance it out, because we do not have any proper representation from either of the side. So that's why, in order for me to balance, they might say that, of course, the pandemic was never within the plan, and everything that was designed at that time were pre-pandemic, and pandemic COVID-19 could also be a significant factor. But we won't go there at this moment in time, because obviously today's discussion is not that. Because literally I've got 5 minutes before I go to a break. And Jamal, Ahmed, I understand you've got only first segment with us, so I'll take whatever I've got time. I want to ask you some questions before you leave. Now, with regards to, we have heard about how it can cause unrest. We have heard from our guest misinformation, disinformation. Now, as a parent, especially within the society that we live in, community live in, as an IT expert, now, what advice would you have, or would you give us to ensure, because we've heard about the online abuse, we've heard about children going through a lot of trauma or mental health, how can we protect them? What can we do?
So I think the first thing we need to do as parents is to be aware of what engagement your child, or if you're a guardian, what engagement they are having with social media. And one of the things Ben touched on is it can really have a massive impact on somebody's mental health. And I'll tell you a story. So one of my peers, when she was younger, she had body dysmorphia because everywhere she looked, she saw pictures of women who were very thin. Now, that is not the reality. But for somebody who's growing up in COVID, who's not going out there seeing what reality reality is the only experience of what people look like is based on, let's say, Instagram or Facebook or some other social media. They have a very warped perception of what reality is, and they have anxiety and mental health issues because they feel like they are not that perfect person or those perfect people they see on Instagram and on social media. And so they would develop what we call eating disorders and habits and things like that. And when this gets really extreme, it can actually lead to people being hospitalized and really facing a lot of hardship in their life, which is completely unnecessary. And as parents, the first thing you need to do is to understand how much screen time your children are having with these platforms, and make sure that these platforms have cookie settings or virtual private networks, so they're not profiling your children, and they're giving them a balanced perspective rather than just really giving them an extreme view of what the world looks like. And that is the problem we have with any social media algorithm, is it looks at what you're looking at, it looks at what you're doing, and it gives you more and more of that, which means that your perception of reality becomes more and more warped as you go down what we like to call the rabbit hole, and you only have this false virtual world of the ideal that people are putting, which is not reality.
Now, you've mentioned about, obviously, in the beginning, the Facebook needs obviously regulated, or big tech needs to be regulated. You've talked about how our parents can do, what role they can play. Now, a lot of our parents are not IT tech. They're not an expert. They don't even know how to use a computer or a laptop, or perhaps they can do a little bit of maybe mobile phone calling, sending text, that's it. But they don't know how the world of IT works. Now, what can we do to help them ensure that not only they are protected, but the contents that their children view are also, even if it could be lawful or legal, but harmful? What can they do then?
Well, there's actually some really good solutions on the market where you can restrict how much time your child can have on their device connected to the internet. And once that time runs out, unless you as the parent put the password in, they won't have access to that. So I think that's probably one of the first things we can do, is to find a solution. That means even if we're not tech savvy, if we can't look at what they're doing, what their activities are, we can limit how much exposure they have to that.
Jamal bhai, thank you very much. I would love to continue our discussion, but thank you very much once again for giving us your valuable time. I know you're very busy, but once again, thank you very much, Jamal bhai, for giving us your valuable time. And that's Jamal Ahmed, Fellow of Information Privacy. When we come back from break,